The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
A lot of yakking going on at the owners' meetings in Orlando for the NFL. Not a lot of media information coming out of it. Dan Quinn wrapped up his session about an hour ago or so. Yesterday, Adam Peters, the general manager for the Commanders, held his session. I pulled a bunch of things out of that, which we will get to. But I think the big news coming out yesterday were the rule changes and what they're trying to do to make the game safer when I don't think it's really possible to do it, especially in this way. I mean, you can't tackle high because you hit the head. Can't tackle low because you hit the knees. And now you can't tackle in the middle because they call that the hip drop, and players are getting hurt on that, so they want to stop that as well. I don't know. How do you bring these guys down? Washington just brought in a couple of linebackers who, may or may not be helpful to tackling players. But if you can't tackle, how are you going to tackle? We'll get into that and talk about a variety of other things, a little bit on the tournament. Brad Underwood was on yesterday on our morning show on Sportsmanlike as Illinois is moving on. It's pretty much a chalky tournament, and they're chalk. They're a 3 seed moving on. If they win against Iowa State, they would likely face Connecticut with the chance to go to the Final Four, but right now Connecticut looks unbeatable. All that stuff, we'll unpack that today, and I want to spend some time, too, on gambling, and not just the Shohei Ohtani story, but there's another one surfacing from the NBA. And, in fact, let's start with that because I think that is something that's very much underplayed right now. And I think that as we go forward with legalized gambling, we're going to see more and more of this. They're, trying to flag these things, but how much can they do it? And there's a center on the Raptors. You may not have even heard of him. His name is Jontay Porter. He's the brother of Michael Porter Jr., who was on the world champion Denver Nuggets last year. He's a good player in this league. Well, the younger brother, Jontay Porter, went undrafted in 2019 and is a guy who's, bounced around in the G League. He played 11 games for Memphis in his first year. He's been with Toronto as what they call a two-way player. They can bring him back and forth from the G League. And the NBA is now investigating Porter for unusual bets reportedly placed on his performance during multiple games this season. An as-yet unidentified gambler or gamblers place significant wagers on Porter's individual statistics, such as points, rebounds, assists, and three-pointers during the Raptors' January 26 loss to the Clippers and Wednesday's defeat to the Sacramento Kings. In both games, that's Wednesday of last week, of course, in both games, Porter played limited minutes after leaving early with minor injuries. First game, he said he had an eye issue. Second game, he had the flu. All those things don't pop up before the game. During the game, it happens. Oh, and guess what? The bettors bet the under on his numbers. So these are the kind of players that you have to be concerned about. Can you pay Steph Curry enough to throw a game? No, you can't. The guy makes millions and millions of dollars. LeBron James, you can't do that. I guess you could conceivably have a high-scoring player shave some points, miss a couple of shots on purpose at the end of the game, but more likely it's going to be a guy like this who isn't making a tremendous amount of money and who probably wouldn't be on the radar of most people, but is easily bet on. And when it starts to happen, when they start to flag these things, it leads you to believe that there's more of this going on, there's more of this to come. And when the NBA got in bed, as all the leagues did, but Adam Silver was out in front on this. He was the first one to say, hey, they're making a lot of money over in Europe, allowing people to bet on their phones during games. We got to get that. And they got it in the NBA, and they got it in Major League Baseball, and they have it in the NFL, only in states where it's legal. It's 38 states, and we'll get to the Ohtani situation in a moment. It's not legal in California. And when you get in bed with gambling, this is the collateral damage that comes out of it, and it's not the stars that you have to worry about. It's guys like this, and he would be vulnerable to gamblers who would promise him say $1 million. $1 million to him means a lot. Doesn't mean much to Steph Curry, but it means much to Jontay Porter. And so this is a real concern right now. Can they find systems to flag these kind of things easier? I don't know. But this is, on one hand, and this is what we were told while people were trying to move forward to get gambling legalized. I remember meeting with people about this 20 years ago who said, hey, this will flag these type of things. This will cut down on the possibility of games being thrown and so forth. Well, yes and no. Now gambling is more prevalent, easier to do. It's probably easier to get in touch with guys like this. I'm not saying that this actually happened, but come on. I mean, who's betting on Jontay Porter? It just isn't a logical thing. And you might put down $10 if you're his buddy, but if you're putting down thousands and thousands of dollars, that's not going to make a lot of sense. So that's got to be a concern. Baseball's got a bigger problem on its hands, and they, I'm sure, are just praying that even if Shohei Ohtani is lying when he said he never bet on any sport, they're praying that if, in fact, he did bet, it was not on baseball. Because if he bet on baseball, oh, my God, have they got a problem. Now, I watched the news conference yesterday. His interpreter, Ippei Muzahara, has been fired. And if you watched it or read about it, you know that Shohei put the entire blame on Muzahara. I have a hard time getting my head around the idea that Muzahara had complete access to the bank account to the tune of $4.5 million that he could gamble away and nobody notices. And the way this was uncovered, by the way, in case you're not up to speed on this, it wasn't that baseball found this. It was the feds, and they were investigating this illegal bookmaker who ran up a bunch of debts himself. And when they were going through the files, this is what they found. And sure, I mean, the checks would have to have, or the wire transfers would have to have Ohtani's name on them because Muzahara wouldn't have that kind of money. He'd have to put it through. And nobody flagged any of this. Nothing was caught until the feds looked into this. It's possible, but it's hard to believe. He talked for 12 minutes. He's got a new interpreter. His name is Will Ireton. And he did seem a little bit emotional about it. He didn't speak anything but Japanese during the news conference. Seemed to understand everything. I believe he does speak a little English, but does not speak English publicly. But here's what's happening now. Baseball has found enough suspicion here, even with Ohtani just saying, hey, it wasn't me. I had no idea. When I found out about this last week when we were in Korea, we were about to play an exhibition game, or no, it's regular season, actually. That's how baseball has sold opening day. It's actually already happened. Used to be a big deal. Not anymore. But anyway, they were about to play San Diego last week, and then he found out that his interpreter had been fired after the interpreter, Muzahara, had given an interview to ESPN saying that Ohtani paid off the debts. So, and then he changed the story. No, it was all me, and now they're throwing everything at him. And I guess Ohtani I know he's hoping this all sticks, and it's all blamed on Muzahara, and he's off the hook on here. Now, the Dodgers are obviously concerned about this, about the money that they've spent so far on Ohtani, giving him a $700 million contract, though most of that is deferred. They also figure he's worth about $50 million to the team in ticket sales, merchandising, and advertising, $50 million a year. And the question is going to be for Rob Manfred, the commissioner, if it turns out that Ohtani knew about the gambling, what's the penalty going to be? If it's betting on baseball, man, I mean, I don't think he's got any way around banishment for life. I don't see it. The precedent's been set with Pete Rose. If he finds out he's lying about the gambling and he didn't bet on baseball, well, maybe it'd be a suspension and a fine or something like that. But this is really a third rail right now for baseball, and they sure as hell don't want to touch it. They are hoping that this investigation, which was announced on Friday, shows at least that he didn't bet on baseball. He could have been lying yesterday when he said he never bet on any sport ever. But if he was lying about that, They're hoping that it wasn't on baseball because they got a major problem if that's the case. Steve Futterman is a reporter. He was out at the Dodgers exhibition game last night. Ohtani did the news conference in uniform before the exhibition game. And this is what he found talking to fans in the stands.
Well, Ohtani got a huge ovation when his name was announced in the starting lineup.
Designated hitter, number 17, Shohei Ohtani.
I spoke to Chris Frangiola. He is from New York, now lives in L.A., a Dodger fan. His gut feeling is that Ohtani is telling the truth.
I believe it. I'm going to say I believe it.
Why?
Based on nothing. I mean, I feel like the other guy, his interpreter, I'm hearing more and more about it, and it seems like he was a bit of a shady character. So until I hear anything else, I'm going to believe him.
Now, another person I ran into watching the game from the stands was a former Major League pitcher and broadcaster, Steve Lyons. He still has one big question.
How did his interpreter get the money? How was he able to have access to Ohtani's accounts? Now, they're very, very close, right? So it's possible that he had free reign with some sort of bank accounts that Ohtani had.
And I think that's the key question that remains. Even if everything Ohtani said is true, wouldn't you notice millions missing from your bank account?
Yes. And if somebody is an employee, don't you pay him a salary? You give him access to your money? Doesn't make sense. I guess there are some transactions that you need to know how to speak English to make, perhaps. But you also have, I would think, accountants. And accountants might say, Shohei, we were going through your numbers here, and looks like a lot of money is going to someone whose name is Bowser. We don't know who this person is. That is the alleged illegal bookmaker in all this. We want to know about this. Wouldn't there have been a red flag along the way? So we'll see what's uncovered in this investigation. But baseball has its fingers crossed on whether or not baseball is involved in this, because it's a whole different ball game if he's betting on baseball, and I don't think you have any choice but to suspend him for life. And maybe Ohtani is so valuable to baseball that you find a way to get Pete Rose back in just so you can bring back Ohtani on this. But the legalized gambling has opened the door to this to some degree. That's not related here because there is no legal sports betting in California. This was illegal betting. But the real question is, what were the bets made on? Were they made on sports other than baseball, or were they made on baseball? And that becomes an enormous problem for Major League Baseball if that's the case. The news conferences that are going on in Orlando, along with the owners' meetings, Dan Quinn spoke about an hour ago, and I'm going through the tweets of the beat reporters who were there. Nothing really earth-shattering out of this, except maybe that Quinn had said the other day that it was safe to assume that they were going to take a quarterback at number 2, and he said he doesn't really know. He said he has not really worked this out so far with Adam Peters. He said he's only now getting deep into the tape on the quarterbacks, and he said he asked what he thinks of people speculating on the path of the plan at number 2, and there was a report yesterday that Adam Quinn is moving in the direction of J.J. McCarthy of Michigan, that there are people who, as they say, people familiar with his thinking. I don't know how that comes about, but they like McCarthy at 2. Could be Drake May. Who knows? It could be. They could trade down. They could trade up. But everything is on the table right now. He says. But Quinn said today, if they say they know, they have to fill me in because Adam and I don't know yet. Quinn did say he'd like to have joint practices. I would think that they would keep that tradition up with Baltimore. That seems to make a lot of sense. And he said he's just really still diving into the roster and diving into the draft, and can't give you a lot of answers on things, which is pretty typical of these things. He did say though about the tackling, and not the new rule change where you can't tackle a guy around the waist, but the linebackers that they've brought in, the people that they have now in the secondary. He said if you're not a good tackling team, you're going to get your ass kicked. And this has not been a good tackling team the last 4 years under Ron Rivera. This is Peters from yesterday, Adam Peters, on all the movement that they did, where they bring in 16 new free agents And this is what he said about all the moves that they made in the last couple of weeks.
We set out to get players that fit what we do. First of all, on the field, play the way we want them to play style, and then the right type of people as well. And both of those things were really points of emphasis for us. And the way you do that, I think, a lot of times is, people research. You can research other teams, but the best evaluations you can do are when you're around somebody day in and day out. So we happened to get a lot of guys that we had really good familiarity with and knew what they were all about, and knew their play style, their mentality, the way they practiced, the way they worked, how much they loved football. So those were the things we set out to do, and I thought we did. Our team did a really good job of getting those guys in.
Yeah, so he's not defensive at all about the connections he has with the players that come in. It's pretty typical. Bobby Wagner played for Dan Quinn in Seattle, and I don't know what he's got left at 34, but he knows the kind of defense that they want to run. He can help the younger players. They brought in guys with connections, and that happens all the time, and especially at this level of free agency. And this is a very, for the most part, low level of free agency. They sign most of these players to one-year deals. Here's Quinn.
We have a lot of optionality moving forward by doing that. So a lot of it's by design, a lot of it's by just, who's available and how they're available and how many years they want to sign for. But finding, being able to sign some guys for longer term and some guys for shorter term, keeping the optionality for next year. We always want to build through the draft. And it's funny to say that, and we signed a lot of free agents, but I think we need to sign free agents in order to field the team, really. And but this gives us optionality, and we're going to build through the draft this year and next year and continue to do that and supplement through free agency.
Yeah, it's 3 times you used the word optionality. I didn't go to a really good school like UCLA, but maybe that's a word, optionality. Hadn't heard that before. How about options? But he likes optionality. So they have optionality on that and on the draft as well. And that was the point of bringing in these type of free agents before the draft, so that when they get into it next month, in less than a month now, that they will not have to reach for players at positions.
And you always want to do that. You never want to get in a situation where you're drafting for need, and we don't ever want to do that. So a lot of that was the moves that we made is so we don't have to do that. Come in with a team where you think you feel ready to play, and then you can draft the best player available, and that's so. I feel really good. Our guys did an incredible job of getting out and getting as many guys as possible that fit what we do. And so that makes our job easier in the draft, where we can go ahead and pick the guys that we think are going to be the best commanders.
So that's some of Adam Peters yesterday at the owners' meetings. I'll play some more of his comments coming up in the 10 o'clock hour. And the meetings, are due to wrap up, what's today, Tuesday? I would think by tomorrow. I think there's some more votes that have to be taken on some of these rule changes. And we'll talk more about the rule changes later this hour. Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network on with Rich Eisen yesterday, trying to make sense of this hip drop tackle that is now outlawed in the NFL. I saw a tweet from Wade Phillips, longtime defensive coordinator and head coach in the league, and he said, you just can't do it. You can't tackle a guy right if you can't get him around the waist. He said, other if you knock him down standing up. So it's coming in. The one thing about the league, they experiment with rules. If they don't work, they change them. But this is going to be an interesting adjustment period, especially during the preseason when it's going to be called all the time. It's going to drive you crazy if you watch those games. Usually, by the time they get to the regular season, they have a better handle on it, both the players and the officials. But right now, it looks like, what? You can't hit them high, you can't hit them low, and you can't hit them in the middle? How's this football? We'll talk more about it. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
I got Mike Callow in for Tony today. The owners, breaking this, not unexpected, but the owners have approved this new kickoff rule in the NFL. It's a little complex. You'll probably have to look at some charts to fully understand how this works. But what you're going to have is the kickoff team kicking off at the 40-yard line. The return team's blockers will be lined up at the 35. So it's going to be on that one side of the field. You're kicking off from the other team's 40-yard line. Yeah, it's crazy. There's the midfield, and then you go across midfield to set up the kickoff, and then the blockers for the return team are only 5 yards apart from you, and then you have 2 returners which are set up at the goal line. And if you kick it out of the end zone, which is obviously very easy to do from the 40-yard line, the other team gets the ball at the 35. So it's in your best interest to kick it off in that spot between the 20 and the end zone, and you hope that your tacklers can get past the blockers 5 yards apart to tackle the returner inside the 20-yard line. I mean, this is really revolutionary. This isn't just tweaking with the kickoff. This isn't what they put in last year where you could have a fair catch, kind of like you do in college. Let's say you fair catch at the 5-yard line and you get it at the 25, which really wasn't used that much. Most of the kickers just kicked it right out of the end zone. Everybody took over at the 25. This is going to change things, and it's going to make it exciting, I guess. Is it going to cut down on injuries? I don't see how, because you're still having to get past the blockers, and there's going to be almost at every kickoff now. There's going to be a return. There has to be, because you don't want the other team to get it at the 35-yard line. So there's going to be returns. The question is this that much safer? And there's no such thing as a gunner anymore. You remember when at one time they were kicking off from the 30, and it was the job of the gunner to run down the field as fast as he could and bust up the wedge. And they said, no, that's too dangerous. Can't have that anymore. So now we got this cockamamie alignment. I mean, when you see this, when you see the charts, you're going to say, really? This is how they're going to kick off? They've approved it. It's there. So done deal. And kickoffs are going to look a whole lot different once we start playing football again in the summertime. Wow. NCAA Tournament, that rolls on. Talked a lot yesterday about the chalkiness of it. Got all 4 number 1s and all 4 number 2s left and 3 3s. And really, it's not just the chalk. It's the fact that the top teams haven't been challenged for the most part. Now, Texas A&M took Houston to overtime. Houston won that game in OT. But there really hasn't been a seriously close call for the ones like Purdue. Purdue beat Utah State 106-67 on Sunday. It was, complete blowout. Arizona as a 2 seed, they still beat Dayton by 10. And then you have a matchup of chalk here with here meaning what's going to happen this weekend in Boston. Illinois, which is the 3 seed, and they took care of their first-round game against Morehead State, 85-69. They didn't have much trouble with Duquesne, 89-63. They're going to play an Iowa State team, which easily beat South Dakota State in the first round, 82-65, and then took care of Washington State, which beat Drake. They beat them 67-56. So double-digit wins all around for everybody. Brad Underwood is the Illinois coach. He did lose to Maryland during the season, so they do have some flaws, obviously. But it's the 3 seed moving on to the Sweet 16, and he was on our morning show yesterday on Sportsmanlike and was asked why he thinks his team is still dancing right now.
I think we're number 1 in the country right now offensively. I think we've got a bunch of guys who can really score. We're a little bit of a different team in terms of we don't play what you would consider a traditional point guard. We're a team that really starts 5 power forwards. We play booty ball. We're not a team that is get the ball side to side to side. We're a little different than that. We're very fast in transition. Terrence Shannon has been electric. So we've got some guys who can really score, and for most of the year have been really good defensively. So we've been able to survive because of those things.
Coach, I was at a watch party over the weekend in New York City, a bunch of Illinois grads there, and we were having this conversation, and I would love to bring you into it as the expert in this subject matter. But you've had so much talent during your time at Illinois. You've had a lot of teams that were worthy of being in this position, but it just feels different this year. What is different about this team to get to the Sweet 16 compared to a lot of the other talented teams you've had in years past?
Yeah, Michelle, we had the team that was a 1 seed with Ayo Dosunmu, who's having a great pro career, Kofi Coburn, But I think the one thing that's this team's deep. We're really old. I think one of the challenges that team had was we had not been in the tournament in years. And that team didn't understand maybe what I term the abruptness of the end. If you play bad, you go home. And that team was lacking in experience. This team's older. This team has great connectivity. They're really, really good people. You enjoy being around them, and they have a lot of fun. And then I think we're very diverse. I think we can play a lot of different ways. We can play really big. We can put 5-out shooting around there. We can play in the half court if you want to, or we can play really fast. So that's something we've really tried to work hard on in the recruiting process, is being a little more diverse as we move into postseason play.
Along with Fighting Illini alum Michelle Smallman and Evan Cohen here on Unsportsmanlike with Brad Underwood, the head coach at Illinois. You mentioned really old. It's where I was going to go. It's such an interesting thing. Hawkins on your team, Shannon. These are big-time contributors that are really old. I say old like they're a million years younger than us. But that has become a trend in college basketball. Is that the goal now, to get as old and eligible as possible in your sport?
Yes. Very simply, yes. The COVID year, when they gave everybody that extra year, you've got the widest discrepancy ever in college sports in terms of you've got 6th and 7th year guys now that are playing. They're 25 years old, playing against 18-year-olds. The experience factor. It's very hard to find freshmen that are good enough to help you win. They're good enough to play, but are they good enough to help you win? And so it's really challenging that way. We get a young man in Marcus Mariota who comes from Southern Illinois, who's a 2,000-point scorer. He's a guy that has seen everything. And so his experience, his 4 years in the weight room, all of that stuff just leads to a wide discrepancy in terms of youth versus age.
Coach, you also mentioned one of the characteristics of this team is the fun that you're having. So I want to talk about some of the fun viral moments that Illinois has had so far in the tournament. The super soakers, the synchronicity with the pushing of the chairs and the handshakes. How much fun is this team having right now?
Well, that's, I think, the whole key. And I think I've surrounded myself with a bunch of younger guys on my staff that have helped me not be so serious. And, we could be third graders at times, the super soaker water gun fight and getting doused with water. And, it's pretty cool to walk in the locker room after doing an interview and somebody's handing you a super soaker and goggles. And, instead of getting the bath all the time, it was nice to be able to, return the favor. But, we got to have fun. Marcus Mariota, Coleman Hawkins, they've started the handshake deal line and pushing the chairs in, and it's just having fun. I mean, they're young men, but they're kids at heart, and they're having fun with an unbelievable experience and something they'll never forget. And I told them before this all started, the one thing I wanted them to do was when they reconvene in 20 years and 25 years or whenever it is, and they bring everybody back here for reunion, I want them to talk about how much fun they had, and not just the wins, but how much fun they had, and remember those moments.
Coach, because of the nature of the sport now, which is ridiculous that the NCAA opened up the transfer window before the actual season ends here, do you simultaneously have to worry about this year's team and next year's team?
I'm worrying about this year's team. My staff can worry about next year's team. They actually called me yesterday, one of my staff members, and asked me about somebody in the portal, and I told him to leave me alone. I was going to take a nap. This is insane doing it at this time of year, in my opinion. I know there's no probably perfect calendar time, but we've got people monitoring the portal constantly. And, we're not oblivious to the fact that there's a lot of kids in it already. But we're not going to relinquish this moment and the great timing that we're in with Illinois basketball and what this team is. I've said it, this team is special. This team's fun. I've enjoyed coaching this team more than any team I've had, and I'm gonna really try to embrace the moment and live it with these guys.
Well, up next, Coach, you have a tough matchup versus the 2 seed in Iowa State. Early in probably the scouting of this team as you get ready for Thursday, but what can you tell us about what you're prepared for that matchup?
Yeah, it's a rock fight. They're so good defensively. They're very handsy. They're very athletic. They've done an unbelievable job. TJ's just built that thing into a dynasty almost in terms of what he's doing. The defensive side, they're very, very talented. They're aggressive, and they've got a great point guard. So it's easy to see why they won the tournament. It's easy to see why they're a 2 seed, and we're going to have to play extremely well to win.
That's Brad Underwood, the head coach at Illinois, as they move on to face Iowa State. That'll be Thursday night in Boston. And as I say, both teams have gotten here rather easily to the Sweet 16. Illinois took care of Morehead State in the first round, and then they got by Duquesne 89-63, while Iowa State was an easy winner over South Dakota in the first round, and then they beat Washington State 67-56. So they're going to match up. The winner of that is likely to play Connecticut. Connecticut's got the championship rematch with San Diego State. I think UConn is probably even better this year, and San Diego State's not as good as they were last year. They did win their first round game in kind of a squeaker. They beat UAB 69-65, and then had a pretty easy time beating Yale 85-67. So again, it's a very chalky tournament, and we are, I think, possibly going to see 4 number 1 seeds in the Final Four. It's happened before, and I could easily see it happen again, even with the shakiness that Houston showed in getting by Texas A&M. A lot of teams on their way to a championship have a game like that. And I remember Maryland had that kind of game where they beat UConn in the Elite Eight, and that was the kind of game that, it could have gone either way. Steve Blake hit a big shot at the end. They survived, they advanced, and they went on to win the national championship. So I could see that happening with them. And they play Duke coming up on Friday. That'll be Friday in Dallas. Coming up in the next hour, more from Adam Peters, who spoke yesterday about what the Commanders are planning to do in the draft. Didn't reveal a whole lot of information, but you may be able to read between the lines on some of what he said. And Wally Sczerbiak on with Dan Patrick yesterday, talking about the return of the big man to college basketball. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. So imagine if you're Rip Van Winkle and you wake up in like mid-September and realize it's Sunday. You flip on an NFL game, game's about to start, and you look at the screen and you go, what? Where are these players lining up? This is a kickoff? What kind of a play is this? Well, you better get used to it, Rip and others, those of us who are supposedly awake. The NFL has ratified a new kickoff rule, which has the kickoff team's tacklers lining up at the other team's 40-yard line. Not their own 40, but the other team's 40-yard line. The return team has their blockers lined up at their own 35, so they're only 5 yards apart. And then you have 2 returners up against the goal line with the object of the kicker to put the ball in between the other team's 20 and the goal line. Because if you kick it out of the end zone, they get it at the 35. I don't know if you want to give them that field position. So the best thing is to get it inside that spot and hope that your tackling team is able to get past those blockers, or only 5 yards apart from them, and make the tackle and prevent the ball from coming out onto the 35. It's pretty radical, and there's going to be a lot of carping about this, even if some think it works well. It's designed to cut down on injuries. They thought the kickoff was too dangerous, so they went too far last year where they had the fair catch rule. If you caught a kickoff, let's say at the 5 or 6 yard line, you could get it out to the 25, and it really became moot because most of the kickers were just kicking it straight out of the end zone anyway, and it just was a touchback and it was a dead play. So they got the kickoff back in the game, but it's totally different. The rule passed 29-3. Apparently the Commanders were for it because only the 49ers, the Raiders, and the Packers voted against it. And, like we always say, we'll have to see how it all plays out. But this is totally foreign to the football that I grew up with. And, you look at a guy like Brian Mitchell. I think he had 6 punt returns for touchdowns, and I want to say 7 kickoff returns for touchdowns. I'd like to see him get in the Hall of Fame, although there's not going to be any numbers really to measure him against. I don't think they're going to have big kickoff return numbers anymore, maybe. Devin Hester is in the Hall of Fame, and he was an unbelievable kick returner. I think Mitchell's right with him, and I'd like to see Brian get in as well. But this is totally different. This is a lot different. The hip drop tackle, which they outlawed, that's going to be, both sides are going to have to get used to that, and that'll eventually run its course. But this is just so different. It's like nothing you've ever seen before on an NFL football field. Nothing. I mean, I can't think of a rule that has been so optically different. They've changed the rules over the years, like how you can defend wide receivers. Mel Blount, who is a big, tough cornerback for the Steelers, used to obliterate receivers coming over the middle. You could just clobber them, and that was part of the steel curtain defense. And then in the late 1970s, I said, no, the scoring's too low. We got to open it up more. So receivers, you couldn't hit them after 5 yards, and it really opened up the passing game. But that you don't have to really, you have to at least really watch the game to understand that. This is something like, if you've been to football games over the years and you haven't paid much attention to the strategy and how the game's played out, at least it looks kind of the same. It looks, kind of like the game that was played in the 1960s. This will look like something from the future, from like well, we're in the space age, but whatever age we're in, this is something that we have never seen before. That the kickoff team has their blockers at the tacklers at the other team's 40, and the blocking people are just 5 yards apart from them. Crazy. This is one of the most radical things that I've ever seen. Football's changed its rules over the years for sure, but nothing that is so optically different like this one is. All right, couple things from the news conferences that have been going on at the owners' meetings. Yesterday, Adam Peters spoke, the general manager of the Commanders. We'll get to what he said in a moment. I just want to run through real quick Ben Standig's tweets of what Dan Quinn said at his news conference earlier today. I'll go through the tape on it and play some of it tomorrow. It doesn't sound like there's anything earth-shattering. He says that he really hasn't been totally diving into the draft. He hasn't had a lot of time to do that because he's been looking at his own roster and the free agents. And he kind of walked back on the statement he made going into the owners' meetings that it would be kind of safe to assume that they would take a quarterback at number 2. He says he's now only getting into the tape and about people speculating on what they're going to do at 2. There's even now speculation that Dan Quinn is going to take J.J. McCarthy at number 2. I don't think if he wants him, I don't think he'd have to take him at 2, but that's now speculation. But he said and this is Standig's quote from Dan Quinn earlier today, if they say they know, they have to fill me in because Adam and I don't know yet. And you'll hear Adam say pretty much that in a moment. This is the first time we've heard from Peters on this. They brought in all these free agents, and they had various news conferences for them. And Marcus Mariota said, I'm here for whatever. I'm here if they need me to start, if they need me to mentor a young quarterback, I can do that. Been there, done that. He also was the number 2 pick of the draft after winning the Heisman Trophy at Oregon. He also has been cut. He also has been in a position where he's been a backup and hasn't played, like last year in Philadelphia. Virtually didn't play at all because of Jalen Hurts. So he's ready for any role that comes along. But this was Peters yesterday on why he decided to sign Mariota.
He's been in the league a long time. He's won a lot of games. He's won playoff games. So knowing him he has a great relationship with Brian Johnson, who put in a great word for him. And so understanding what he's all about and the type of person he'd be in that room supporting whoever else is in that room. So, and the fact that he's still really good. He's athletic, he can throw it, he's smart, and he's got familiarity with what we do. So we're really, really happy to get Marcus in. We explored, I think anytime in free agency you have to explore a number of different options because you don't know who you're going to get, but we're really excited to have Marcus.
Now, when he says he doesn't know who he's going to get, that would seem to confirm that they're taking a quarterback if they stay at 2. They may trade back and still take a quarterback, but it seems certain that they're going to draft a quarterback. But Peter says anybody who says they know who the Commanders are going to take, they don't know.
Now, we still have a lot of it. A month till the draft today? Yeah, right. So it doesn't sound like a long time, but you get a lot of information in that month, and there's still some of the guys we haven't seen still in person. So we'll go out and do that next week, see a couple more quarterbacks, and then we'll do visits with them. We'll do Zoom calls. We'll do a lot of different things. So we're far from our answer.
When they get their answer, he's indicating here it's not going to necessarily depend on experience. Like Jaden Daniels, 5 years in college, won at Arizona State, and then spent 4 years at LSU. Drake May only played 2 years of college football, was a backup to Sam Howell as a freshman at North Carolina, and then played 2 years. Some have said the long-term upside for Drake May is greater. He's not going to be ready to go right out of the box where you might have that with Jaden Daniels. Peters is saying, and maybe this is just not to tip his hand, but he's saying that quarterback readiness is not going to be a factor here.
You weigh that. How ready are they immediately, or how much work do they have to do, and then how can you get them there? And so with the guys we have in the room right now, I don't think we have to rush anybody, and so that's a great thing, whether with Marcus in there, with Jake in there. We're not going to have to rush whoever. If we draft a guy, we wouldn't have to rush him into play right away, and that's not how we work anyway. We're going to play the person who's going to give us the best chance to win.
Well, yeah. Sort of, they want to win long term. Right now, if the season started, right after the draft, you'd have to say, well, Marcus Mariota is your guy. He's probably the guy who's going to give you the best chance to win out of the box. The question is, what's going to happen down the road and who's going to develop into your starter. I can't believe that 4 years from now, Marcus Mariota is your starting quarterback, because if he is, that's going to be a problem. Now, this is about what's going to happen in front of them. And, this is the time of year where there's speculation on everything. And there is some that say, oh, yeah, there's real concerns about Caleb Williams. Don't think that the Bears are necessarily going to take him. Peters is saying that he's prepared for that and anything else that might happen.
Yeah, I think you got to be prepared for anything. I can't assume that they're doing – they're drafting a certain guy at number 1. So, because if you do that and then they don't, then you're like, oh shoot. But so you always have to prepare for everything. Prepare like any option's open. And so, regardless of how much information that you have that says one thing leading up to it, you don't know until that card's turned in.
So that's probably every year in the draft. This is on the 2 linebackers that they brought in, Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner, who's played for Dan Quinn before. Louvu, not as familiar, but they think he's an up-and-comer and comes from Carolina, which was a terrible team, so maybe he gets to a good team. Well, not that this team is good yet, but can be part of a good team down the road. But one of the things that Dan Quinn said today at his news conference, the coach, he said, if you're not a good tackling team, you're going to get your ass kicked. And, kind of remarkable that Ron Rivera, a former NFL linebacker, part of maybe the greatest defense ever in the '85 Bears, a linebackers coach to start his career, a defensive coordinator, and then a defensive-minded coach, had a bad tackling team. And also, as a linebacker, never really developed any good linebacker play. The linebacker play over the last 4 years has not been good at all. So Peters was focused on that, and that's why he brought in Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner.
Those guys are awesome. Really excited to bring both of them in. Frankie just jumps off the tape. The way he plays, his play style, his mindset, his mentality. He's a playmaker. And on top of that, he's extremely passionate. I didn't know much about Frankie other than watching him play and saying, I want that guy on my team. But you do research on all his teammates, absolutely love him. He's a great leader. So he brings a lot of versatility on our defense as well. And then Bobby's going to be a Hall of Famer. And Bobby brings, all those different things that you see off the field, the leadership, the toughness, the work ethic. But then he's also a Pro Bowler. He's a really, really good player still. And so you have those two things. They complement each other well. And I think with Bobby being the quarterback of the defense, that allows Frankie to do things. Frankie can really do well.
Yeah, so that's two guys who hopefully will shore up the tackling game. Wagner at 33 last season led the league in tackles. I don't know if that's the best scenario, and I don't think he's going to last very long here if that's the case, but they do have to improve as a tackling team. Last thing is Jonathan Allen. Jonathan Allen does a radio spot every week, and late in the season, he said he didn't want to be part of a rebuild. And they said, well, would you like to be traded? And he said, no, he didn't necessarily want to be traded, but if he's got a chance to win, he'd like to do it. He's played 7 years in the league. He's been on the team longer than anybody but Tress Way, the punter. And he would be open to a trade if they were going to be interested in doing that. I don't know how much interest he'd have around the league. One of the things about him when he was coming out of Alabama, and the reason that he dropped, I think, to 17, because they were talking about him as a top 10 pick, they traded down when they took him. And part of the reason that he was available down there is he'd had some shoulder problems at Alabama, and there was a question about durability. Would he last? He missed part of his rookie year with a broken foot, but by and large has stayed healthy. He has been a leader. And he's from this area, went to Stonebridge High School, and would like to stay here. And this isn't the be-all, end-all when you ask about whether or not a player is going to be on your team or not. But at the end of his news conference yesterday, Adam Peters was asked about Jonathan Allen and the comment he made that he doesn't want to be part of a rebuild.
Well, we're recalibrating. So we're not rebuilding. No, we've had some great talks with Jonathan, and can't wait to work with him. He's awesome. He's a great young man, and he's a great player. And so, really excited to work with him. So we are not interested in trading him.
Doesn't mean they won't trade him. He just said we're not interested in trading him. If they get an offer that they can't refuse, they're going to trade him. Everything is on the table at this point in this organization. But there is some continuity with bringing him back. And I'm sure he's got to be impressed with what he's seen so far. He's got a defensive coach in Quinn who's been successful in Seattle, in Dallas, and took a team to a Super Bowl with Atlanta. So that's got to be impressive. And he's seen the S show that's gone on here for 7 years. He was brought in when Bruce Allen was here. So, an actual GM like Adam Peters and a coaching staff like this and a coach who's known to be really a player's coach. I mean, you can't seem to find anybody who played for Dan Quinn to say a bad word about him. Speaking of trades, this just in from the owners' meetings, they've agreed to move the trading deadline to after week 9. So it's been around Halloween. This is good. This goes to mid-November. And this works both ways because what you're going to have is, another week or two, even 2 if it's 10 days. I guess it could be at least one more game. But anyway, in the case of the Commanders, if you have at that point Jonathan Allen and in the last year of his deal, I think he's got one more year or maybe 2 more years. But anyway, in his 8th year, and contending teams have had serious injuries on the defensive line, and they want to bulk up for the playoff run, that's a guy you might trade at that point. That's the kind of season it could be. And then down the road, that'd be good for the Commanders if they're a contender. If they've had injuries, they can pick up guys late. The hockey deadline is like less than a month before the season ends. It makes sense. It makes sense to do that. Sometimes you're right around 500 on Halloween. You're not sure where to go. The longer you go into this, with the season now ending in the first week in January and probably not too long from now going 18 games, I think you make it even later in the season. You might have it like December 1st. I could see that happening. If you got 6 weeks to go in the season, especially in football where injuries are such a big factor, I don't have any problem with that. I think that would make a lot of sense. I think that's something they should really think about. Big man in college basketball. What's left of the NCAA tournament? Some bigs. Wally Sczerbiak played college basketball at Miami of Ohio, got them to the Sweet 16, played a long time in the NBA, now an analyst with CBS. Looking at Purdue, looking at Connecticut, looking at North Carolina State, teams that have big men and how far they might go. He talked to Dan Patrick about it yesterday. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
I got Mike Callow in for Tony at 11 o'clock. I'm just following along on Twitter the information that's coming out of the owners' meetings, NFL owners' meetings going on in Orlando. We talked about the new kickoff rule where the kicking team is going to have their tacklers at the other team's 40, and the blockers for the return team will be just 5 yards apart at their own 35, and returners will be 2 returners. I guess that's going to be a rule. You can't just have one back there. You got 2. And the goal is to get it in between the 20 and the goal line, because otherwise if you kick it out of the end zone, the receiving team will get it at the 35. And that's, it's 10 yards better field position than they've been getting when it's been kicked out of the end zone at 25. So they're trying to put the kickoff back in the game, but boy, it is a cockamamie rule that goes along with it. I'd heard about this last year, and I didn't really sense it with the Commanders because, well, I guess mainly because Sam Howell started 17 games and Jacoby Brissett was available for all of them and only played in 2 of them. But the NFL has voted to expand the standard elevation rules to permit teams to elevate a bona fide quarterback an unlimited number of times from its practice squad to the active list to be its emergency third quarterback. So Jake Fromm, not Jake from State Farm, but Jake Fromm was on the practice squad for the Commanders last year. He never appeared in uniform for a game because I guess they had that option of bringing up a third quarterback but didn't feel like they really needed it. So now, and the way this works is he's an extra man on the roster. If you put him in the game, it's only because your first 2 guys got hurt, and you cannot put another quarterback back in the game unless that third guy gets hurt. So you might, let's say you have a rookie quarterback who stinks it up, and he gets benched at halftime. The backup comes in and gets hurt in like the third quarter. You don't really want to put your – I guess you might, but in most cases you wouldn't want to put your young starter back in a game where he's already been benched. So that's when you play the third quarterback in a game that's probably out of hand. And not that big of a deal, but, you know, we have had cases, Brian Mitchell playing quarterback for Washington years ago. And, you know, what did we have? Logan Thomas was the emergency quarterback, having been a quarterback in college. He's not on the roster anymore. So be a little bit of a change there. For college basketball, I looked at Purdue going into this tournament. Not that I'm an expert on this at all, but I wasn't buying this, you know, what Virginia did. Virginia, as the number one seed, got knocked out by UMBC in 2018 and then came back and won the championship in 2019. And I even saw a documentary last week where they talked about that turnaround and how they were able to do it. So, you know, I was skeptical of Purdue, especially, you know, seeing them lose to Fairleigh Dickinson in the first round last year. But so far, they have really taken care of business. They won their opening game as 1 versus a 16, but instead of losing like they did last year, they beat Montana State by 28, and then they played Utah State, more of a legitimate NCAA team than Montana State. They were an 8 seed, and they blew their doors off, 106-67. Was at 39 points. Then probably could have named the score. So now they're going to play Gonzaga, and Gonzaga they're not a Cinderella anymore. They'll never be a Cinderella. They're a major program. They have been to, I think it's now 9 straight Sweet 16s. They took care of McNeese in the opening round and a beat-up Kansas team. Kansas just didn't have the horses to compete with them, but they blew them out 89-68. So now it's Purdue and Gonzaga playing. And yesterday, Wally Sczerbiak, one of the analysts on CBS, was on the Dan Patrick Show. And Dan asked him, this was not a Purdue-specific question, but of all that he's seen in this first weekend of the tournament, what impressed him the most?
They were outstanding yesterday. They absolutely blew Utah State off the floor. Utah State didn't look like they even belonged in the same gym with Purdue. And it just goes to show you that what Purdue has done from last year to this year to retool their roster, to kind of pick up some transfers. Lance Jones has been outstanding. They just have Matt Painter's done a great job to put that in the rearview mirror. And it looks like they're on a collision course with UConn in the national championship game.
But it feels, and I said this will sound strange, but you can get away with having a big man in college basketball. Whereas in the NBA, the traditional big man is gone. But you have a couple of guys in here. Why is it in college basketball, or maybe this is an aberration, that the big men are, front and center?
A lot of people are saying Zach Edey can't play in the NBA and isn't going to be impactful. I beg to differ. You look at a guy like Boban Marjanovic. He's played a little bit. He's had a little bit of an impact. Zach Edey is a similar player, and I think he's a lot more mobile. I think he's really worked on his lateral movement. I think he's done a good job of, getting his body in the best possible shape he could possibly get it in. And the bottom line is when he camps out there in the lane 5 feet from the basket, puts his arms up like this, you can't get around him to deflect the inbound, the entry pass into the post. And when he catches it, he's really tough to stop. I mean, look at a guy like Yao Ming, the success he had in the NBA. Granted, it was a different era and the game was played a different way, but Zach Edey's more athletic than Yao Ming. I played against Yao Ming. It took him a long time to get going front and back on a straight line, and he also could not move laterally very well at all. And Zach Edey's been really working on his mobility. It's going to be interesting to see how it translates because he's a big-time factor. We saw it yesterday. He was an unguardable force. He makes his free throws. He's pretty good blocking shots on the defensive end of the floor. So I would think there are going to be some NBA teams that give him a legit shot to make it.
But NC State has a big guy in DJ Burns. I mean, he's a different big guy. Connecticut, has a big man as well in Klingon. So we're seeing the big man have at least a role, and I wondered if it's college coaches may not be in love with the three because Danny Hurley, they run an old school pick and roll, and it feels like I likened him to Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. It's old school football. He's running old school basketball at Connecticut, and it feels like as a college coach you can control the volume of threes, whereas in the NBA. It feels like everybody gets to shoot it.
Well, the thing is, everyone can shoot it in the NBA, and it's different in college. Not everyone can shoot that open three. And as a result, the court becomes less spaced. There's less driving lanes to get to the basket. To me, Donovan Clingan, his impact is on the defensive end of the floor. When you have a guy like that who has the type of mobility that he does, you can't post up and score on him one-on-one. He's just going to block your shot. If one of your outside perimeter guys gets beaten off the dribble, he's waiting at the rim to protect the rim. So he doesn't allow points in the paint. He doesn't allow points at the rim because he's such a good shot blocker and rim protector. And what makes him so effective over a guy like Zach Edey is he can guard pick and roll. He can move his feet. He can even switch onto a guard. He can space a guard because he's so long. And then when a guard goes up to shoot, he can get up there and contest and block the shot. And he can also move his feet to the point where the guard can't get around him. To me, the biggest impact of Clingan is on the defensive end of the floor. He's, to me, the defensive player of the year in college basketball because he allows Danny Hurley to do so many things with his defense because he makes up for so many mistakes and cleans up the mess so many times.
So that's Wally Sczerbiak, one of the analysts for CBS, on with Dan Patrick yesterday. And I'm thinking about the Yao Ming comparison with Zach Edey. Edey's 2 inches shorter, but when you get to be over 7 feet, what's the big difference there? But when Yao Ming came into the NBA, that was huge. The Rockets had the first pick. Oh my God, they got Yao Ming, and it's going to transform the NBA. Here's a guy who's got these skills. He was still slow, and you heard Sczerbiak say that Edey's more skilled. So that he could be a factor in the league. And I was thinking about this. What if he winds up in San Antonio? Victor Wembanyama is 7'4", also plays a different kind of game. Can dribble, can shoot. He's an all-around player. He's a guard in a 7'4" body. Here's a 7'4" guy in a 7'4" body, just concentrating on the defense. And I don't know if this is an apt comparison, but there was a guy 40-some years ago. His name was Mark Eaton. Mark Eaton was 7'4". I think he's passed away. And he had gone to a junior college to play. When you're 7'4", it doesn't matter what kind of skills you had, especially at that time. Somebody's going to put you on a team. And he played in a junior college, and he was okay. He wasn't making any headlines, and he was working after junior college as an auto mechanic. And as the story goes, there was a scout for UCLA whose car broke down, and he gets it towed to a gas station where Mark Eaton is working, except he doesn't get to see Mark Eaton initially. All he sees is this pair of legs sticking out from underneath a car, and he can't believe how long these legs are. And so he waits for Mark Eaton to roll out from underneath the car and stand up, and he says, "Do you play basketball?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I did at a junior college." He gets him to UCLA. This is an amazing story. Mark Eaton goes to UCLA. He's there for the, I believe, 78-79 season and the 79-80 season. 79-80 season, Larry Brown's the coach. Now, Larry, I guess, inherited him. He wasn't recruited by Larry's staff. Larry didn't want to play him. He barely played. UCLA went to the national championship game. Maybe you can find some video of Mark Eaton sitting on the bench. But Kiki Vandeweghe, I think, was their best big man. There may have been somebody else, but they lost the national championship game to Louisville that year, and so Eaton finishes up at UCLA. And in those days, the draft was like 7 rounds. So the Utah Jazz, they weren't a very good team. Frank Layden was the coach, and he says, there's one thing you can't coach, and that's height. He said, we're going to take a chance. So they took Eaton, 5th round, 6th round. Most guys then didn't make the team, but, you had a draft and you might as well, use your pick. So they used it on Mark Eaton. Well, Eaton had like a 10 or 11-year NBA career where he didn't score a lot of points, but he blocked a hell of a lot of shots. And they had enough scorers on those teams with Stockton and Malone that you didn't need him to score. And I just wonder about big men like Edey, what kind of role they're going to have in the NBA. He's stayed in college longer than anybody in the past that size, at least the recent past, would have stayed. And he's got the NIL deals, and he's got the chance now to win a national championship. I don't know whether that ups his value or not, but people pay more attention to what goes on in the NCAA tournament. In fact, I heard Kenny Smith say this the other day. He said, the way it works in college basketball, especially these days, you are judged on 4 games for your career. That's your entire career. He said those 4 games that get you to the Final Four, those are the only ones that matter. Yeah, it's great to win a national championship, and there are more eyeballs on what goes on in the Final Four. But college basketball is different than other sports. It's not as much about winning championships. It's about making the Final Four. And so Zach Edey, if he can win 2 more games and get to a Final Four, that, I guess, legitimizes him. Not that he's not a great player in college, 2-time college player of the year, but that somehow, maybe makes him more attractive to the NBA. I don't know. But it's just interesting to hear the discussions of big men in an era where they're just so different. They're so marginalized. And, nowadays, a guy like Bob McAdoo, he'd be a superstar in the NBA. When he played in the 1970s, he was kind of a curiosity. He was a 6'11" guy who shot jumpers. And well, what's the point of that? Big man got to go inside. No, McAdoo had a great shot, and nobody was going to block it, obviously. He had a great shot from the corner, played most of his career without the three-point shot. But he's different. And so I look at these big men, Connecticut, and maybe DJ Burns is at 6'9". He's too small to play in the NBA. But he's a force now in college in the middle. And then, Zach Edey, who might wind up playing for the national championship, is very much of a curiosity right now. It's fun stuff. This, by the way, from the NBA last night, forgot to mention this Monty Williams thing. He's the coach of the Detroit Pistons. This is the first year of an enormous contract. They brought him in. He coached the Suns, got fired there, supposed to rebuild the team. They have the worst record. Maybe that's partly by design, that they're part of the process. They'll have the most ping pong balls with the Wizards now, for whatever reason, getting hot, winning 3 straight, and they won 14 games, and Detroit's only won 12. But they lost last night to the Knicks, 124-99. And they got hosed on a bad call there earlier in the season, so maybe it's some Garden hangover there. But last night when the Pistons played the Knicks and lost by 25, Dante DiVincenzo had 11 three-pointers in the game, 11 three-pointers. And Williams was asked about it after the game, Monty Williams. He says, I don't care about their team at all. I couldn't care less. Those guys, the way they got those three, I don't want to be part of that story. So Josh Hart of the Knicks was asked about Williams' comments after the game, and I agree 100% with what he said. And this is what Josh Hart said about Monty Williams and his kvetching about the threes. If he didn't want to be part of the story, he should have told his guys to defend better. I don't know what he's got to say here. We've got a guy that's hot. We're going to try and find the guy that's hot. That's how you play the game. And DiVincenzo had a career-high 40 points the other night, and he had just 8 three-pointers. So, that's the NBA. If you don't want a guy to light you up with 11 three-pointers, defend him. But don't complain about it. Don't just take your lumps. And I guess that's part of the plan. I don't know if Detroit was expected to be this bad this year, but I guess there's no point. If you're going to be a lottery team, you might as well be the worst of the lottery teams because you get the most ping pong balls. So there's that. That is a wrap for me. Mike Callow is in for Tony next, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.